Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is December 30, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. And we want to give another special thanks out to Wally Rustin for introducing me to today's guest, Eugene Halton. That's right, Halton?
Right, yeah.
Good. And better known as Jumpin' Gene. And Gene, what a pleasure. We were putting in part 2 today. The first part was September 30th. So where in the heck you calling in from?
South Bend, Indiana.
How cool is that? Now, Gene, we went into so much in that first part, and I was so enlightened and appreciated your time. One thing I wanted you to clarify was your words to start off, your words optimize versus maximize. And I looked up the etymology of both those words, and optimize means, or according to etymology, means make the most of. And maximize means to make as great as possible. So
I like that, yeah.
how do you differentiate between those two words? I forgot even now what you were applying them to, but overall you can apply it to anything. Go ahead.
Well, I think to optimize something is to bring out the best of what can be applied to what it is that you're doing, or what is the thing, that's underway, without excess. In other words, to optimize may involve limits as well. So do you want to maximize your volume control or optimize your volume control? When you maximize your volume control, you can go deaf. When you optimize it, you may have the right level, the right balance, the right proportion for listening. One of the things that's always gotten me is these discussions of which the original starting assumption may be false. We only use 10, 20% of our brains. Think if we could maximize and use 100% of our brains, And it's always seemed to me like, well, what if you applied that to an orchestra? An orchestra at any given moment in music may be only using 10% or 20% of its instruments. What if you used 100% of the instruments? Well, you probably would not have music. You'd probably have noise at maximum volume instead of optimal. And so that sense of balance and proportion, I think. And I think, one of the problems in the modern world is the triumph of maximalism rather than optimization.
Really well put. We're going to get into music, and that's really applicable there, but it also reminds me of the film director Billy Wilder. He said, make the subtleties obvious. So it's a sort of a play on that, that the difference between those. It was so well put. Now, it's amazing because I have like 150 questions approximately. I usually do about 30 to 40 in 90 minutes. We got through about the first 12. Now we did divert. That's pretty dang good. That says a lot about you, Eugene, because I was like totally enraptured. So we talked a little about, your basic 3 careers are sports, education, and blues harmonica playing. Say education is being an author also. Would you say that's sort of accurate?
Yeah, that seems right. Yeah.
Okay, then what's the tipping point for each one of those 3? Where you're playing sports growing up, where did you go, I want to do this like professionally or seriously? People play sports in high school, maybe they go into college, but then they go, I'm going to be a professional. Whether you called yourself professional, you got pretty dang high up in the sports world. So just
actually literally.
Literally, yeah. Sorry.
As a high jumper, yeah.
Yeah, as a high jumper. So where's that tipping point where you go, that's what I want to pursue, then education for decades, and then blues harmonica for decades?
Well, actually, with athletics, it was a passion. I loved playing basketball, and I was a basketball player in high school. I loved the game, but my spring was not that good, And so I thought I'll go out for high jumping and see if that helps my spring. And actually, over time, my spring did improve, but my high jumping also really improved. I was fortunate enough to I got recruited to to a few places. One of the places I got recruited to that I did not go to was I got recruited by Bobby Knight, the well-known basketball coach, when he was in his last year at West Point, the U.S. Military Academy. And I was already against the Vietnam War. I didn't think that would be a good direction to go in. And I ended up going to Princeton University. I got recruited for basketball and high jumping there. And I was fortunate enough to play my first year, to play basketball for 1 year there. And then to go on to high jumping, because, the professionalization of college sports made it, really difficult to do more than one sport. But my forte became high jumping. I loved it. I had a revelation watching Dick Fosbury win the 1968 Olympics using a new style, the Fosbury flop, it became called. And in my second year in college, my spring had improved, but my height had not improved that as much. My second year of college, I switched to that, and I did really well in college. A couple of years after college, I was on 2 U.S. teams against the Soviet Union, one time Virginia, one time in Russia. But along with this was an idea that I did not want to become a professional. Some friends of mine did become professionals. There was a short-lived professional track tour. And I love the amateurism of sport. I love the sporting of sport, to play freely. And I felt that as much as I loved it, this is not what I wanted to do.
Amazing. Yeah.
I had a kind of a light bulb go on in my junior year in college. You had to do an independent research project. And for the first time, I was not being told what to do in a classroom. I had to come up with my own ideas for a project, and I loved it. And then I went through my senior year, and I developed some ideas for what I wanted to do, and I wanted to go to graduate school and become a scholar.
That's perfect time. Gene, how did you turn over tipping point that I wanted to be a scholar and pursue decades of being an educator? What was the tipping point for that?
Well, again, the light bulb going on, so to speak, from this junior independent paper I had to write, and then you had to do a senior thesis. I was in the sociology department at Princeton. And the idea that both of those projects involved you coming up with ideas, you having to figure it out for yourself. And again, that's kind of a continuation of my athletics, where my coach did not want me to switch to the Fosbury flop. That was the, quote, wrong way of high jumping at the time. But once I improved a half a foot in a month or two, he couldn't argue against that. And similarly, this idea that I had to come up with it, with the research, was exciting, and it started. I was opening more to ideas. So that sense of kind of a do-it-yourself learning process has continued with me throughout my research in my career. I also had a kind of a dream vision one time that in the middle of my senior year in college, that was kind of a life vision that involved at some point this figure with a kind of a golden turban on his head, and who went up into a beam of light. And I took that over a long time of what was that about? I woke up like incredibly vividly awake. The room was kind of, kind of like, flowing. And this is just from a dream. This is not drugs or anything. And I felt that this was some kind of like a suggestion to go in the direction, use your head, so to speak, you know. But
It's like an epiphany. It was like an epiphany enlightenment.
it was a vision, and I
Yeah.
realized in going into my scholarly pursuits that the vision was important to keep alive. The vision that's, you know, things out there that need to be studied, that need to be researched, but also that are true to your own development and the development of the vision. You know, I think each of us has a life vision that we can ignore or make use of, but I think it's really important to allow that vision its place in our life. It's the life often just wants to shut that out. The idea that you have something, an interview, if I may use that term, on your interview program, and there's also a sense in which one's vision lives, has its own life within you when you allow it. And so I've tried to pursue that in my scholarly career, and again, it's tough. You know what? I came to see, you know, a lot of graduate school and higher education more generally is about beating that out of you and trying to get you on a track of either accepted knowledge or acceptable ways to go about you know, knowledge.
Really good, Gene. And then you're growing up, you're hearing music, mainly what, on the radio, live? And what was that tipping point where you go, that's the instrument I want to pursue? Did your parents say, hey, you got to learn piano? Or what's your story on getting to that point, that tipping point to saying, I'm going to play harmonica?
Well, I in elementary school I took drum lessons, a trap drum set, and we even had a little band. We only knew about 5 songs at most, and I enjoyed it. In high school, I didn't have time for that with sports, and college, mostly with it, didn't have time. But then by my end of my junior year, some friends of mine were starting a rock band, and I got myself a set of drums, and this we weren't, you know, very good when we started, and just sort of like do it, you know. And you know, in high school, I listened to music. I loved you know, the emerging Motown sound and all of, you know, the pop music that was on. In college, of course, and I was there in the late '60s and early '70s. You know, all of the music of the '60s were out there, and there was such a range. One of the things I love about '60s music is it's not just one genre. It's drawing from many different time periods and doing a lot of different things. Some friends of mine had met up with and brought down to Princeton for a couple of parties a band called the Holy Modal Rounders.
Yeah.
And two of them, Steve Weber and Peter Stamfel, had been on the first album of another group called the Fugs, who were Greenwich Village beat poets.
Oh, yeah.
And so these guys were wacky, the Holy Modal Rounders. They had, when they came down to party with us, they had just picked up a new drummer in the last 6 months. Their previous drummer had left. He was Sam Shepard, who went on to become known as a playwright and actor. And these guys were just crazy, you know. And there was something about like the kind of music they were playing. You know, first Peter Stamfel and Steve Weber were playing what I think they called it folkabilly or something like that. And and then they were electrified band, and so they were doing other kinds of songs. And I just loved it, you know. I also started listening to some blues in college as well, and I liked that. And at certain points in my last year in college, I picked up a harmonica. I didn't know how to play it. I just made believe I did, and it didn't, you know. Over time, you can kind of pick up some things, but I really didn't know how to play it. And then I lived a year in Philadelphia after college, and then went to graduate school at the University of Chicago. So I found myself on the south side of Chicago, and I moved in next door to a band that was getting a lot of gigs and a lot of attention in Chicago as a space rock band, a kind of freeform rock band. The name of the band was Solaris. And these guys, this was a whole different thing for me. This was like completely freeform music. And they told me they needed an Aquarius drummer. And I happened to bring my drum set with me to sell because I had very little money for graduate school. So I happened to have a drum set, and I happened to be born under the sign of Aquarius. So I ended up drumming with them. And we were going to open for an up-and-coming band called Styx. We're not yet well known. And unfortunately, the keyboard player, this was a trio. The keyboard player had a heart attack. He was 26. I don't know if he had a heart condition or what. But the guitar player, who took the name Joxillian and was and is an amazing guitar player, he and I eventually got back, did some duo. We got another bass player, then we did some gigs. And toward the end of that year, we were jamming with some people playing folk music, and we had kind of like a electronic and folk combination. But the folk people went on to develop, go into the direction of bluegrass, and they became a band called the Special Consensus Bluegrass Band, who are still performing today and with different members, except for the banjo player, Greg Cahill. They're performing internationally still. So I got exposed to some of that, and I picked up harmonica again. The bass player with them had played harmonica with Hound Dog Taylor in the clubs in the south side of Chicago, and he introduced me to who I should be listening to: Little Walter, Big Walter, range of James Cotton and others. And so he was very helpful. Mark Edelston, he helped me to learn not only who I should be listening to, but gave me tips as well. So
that's a good history, Gene. There's one you were hearing Siegel Schwall band probably.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That was a great harmonica player. And then you're probably hearing.
Yeah, I got to know Corky Siegel much later. Yeah.
Yeah, Corky's amazing. And then you probably are hearing, like I did, my sister brought home Led Zeppelin 2, and I heard that, and then my friend said, "That's the blues." And then I went backwards, but it was like you're probably hearing Paul Butterfield and Canned Heat play blues with harmonica. So you're hearing the white guys playing what the black guys sort of established.
Right. And my freshman year in college, I actually had an experience. I went up to Boston during spring break, and my friends from college, we went to it was like a psychedelic disco place, and there was a band that was I guess a psychedelic band playing, but the opener was Charlie Musselwhite.
Oh yeah,
who was a fantastic blues player in his band.
There's another one. Amazing. So that was good history. We're going to get back into music, but just in your creative sense. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. You've written songs, you wrote the lyrics and you wrote the melody.
Mm-hmm.
What role does intention play in your creative process when you're writing the song?
I think intention is a big part of it. What is the song? Sometimes you just have an idea and you work with that. There's other times where the intention is more predominant. So, for example, a Chicago guitar player named Rockin' Johnny Bergen asked me some time ago if I could write a song. He was doing an album for Delmark Records with a great singer named Willie Buck, who learned to sing from Muddy Waters, and they were going to put out the first album of Willie Buck's of his own. And so, I talked with Johnny, about Willie Buck and what his background was, and it turns out Willie had a day job as a tow truck driver. So the intention gave itself to me. Oh, tow truck man. That's
Yeah.
You know, that's what it has to be. So, I found myself like Googling tow truck terms and, what can I do with this,
Yeah.
And so actually, I came up with, here's a line from the song. I got a sway control device, gonna keep you in line. Riding so easy, feeling so fine. I'm a tow truck man. And then it continues. Uh, Trapped down in a ditch where you can't move an inch, but your engine will be purring when I finish with my winch. I'm your tow truck man.
So that's beautiful.
So
That,
you play on that, and that's something else I love. Double entendre,
yeah.
in all kinds of lyrics.
But let's go, Gene, to a poem. Like, what role does intention play when you're writing a poem?
That's a great question. You don't want to be intention heavy. You. I mean, I don't know what professional poets who can write poetry at any time do. But if you're not that and you need to write by inspiration, the inspiration to me, seems to need to take front and center place. But intentionality gets into there too. Maybe intention develops as the poem develops. You know, um, I had an idea for a poem that I went out to my garage and the door opened, and instead of cars being in there were cells of me from different years hanging there, like not hanging, but on hangers, like
Yeah.
And so I that image kind of like, oh, I'm going to work with that. So the intention that came in was to visit different decades. Not everyone every year, but to take one from. I did this in 2012. So I went back 40 years to my 22-year-old self. And my 22-year-old self is looking at my, whatever, 62-year-old self. And there's a little conversation that goes on. And then talking to my future, and then suddenly my future self appears, and then I'm one of the cells hanging in the garage. So there was an image, I guess, started it, a visual image, and that gave me a sense of what could be a narrative, which I guess we call that the intention, if that's what you mean by intention.
Yeah, that's good. And it's also in this realm of Marcel Duchamp saying, uh, um, Duchamp says, there's no art without an audience. When you're writing a song and then
Mm-hmm.
when you're writing a poem, how much are you thinking of your listener or your reader?
Well, for a song, you have to be thinking of, well, like for the one for Willie Buck, I was thinking of Willie Buck, but I was also thinking of it, how would this project, you know? Uh,
Yeah.
uh, so when I'm writing my research or other kinds of works like that, I'm also trying to feel what an audience would be for that. To feel like, well, who is this for? Because you have different kinds of different audiences. I mean, I've written some more philosophical kinds of stuff that's mainly for philosophical readership. I've written stuff that's more broadly, broader, and so I think it does. There's a sense of who's going to be a likely reader, but that's kind of vague because you don't know exactly what the context is going to be. And also writing with breathing. How does this breathe? That there's a level where I think if writing can breathe more, it's going to be more understandable, even if it's more complex.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor, but it's also literal and metaphor. Breathing. That's back to that sort of dynamics of or the word you use is balance.
Mm-hmm.
Again, back to optimize and maximize. But two of my film heroes have a mantra. George Manupelli says, "Ignore yourself." And Jonas Mekas says, "There is no self-expression." In fact, the great jazz pianist Cecil Taylor says, "I'm just a vehicle in this." So again, it's a
It's
stupid
like that.
question.
Could you say it again? I'm just a vehicle.
Yeah, I'm just a vehicle, and this stuff just comes through me.
Yeah.
Like this music comes through me. I'm the vehicle for it. And again, it's like a stupid question. I know it's both and it depends, but just overall as a prompt, is art making, music making more self-expression, or more is it a vehicle for whatever culture, technologies, and environments are dominant?
I would tend more toward self-expression, but I believe that self-expression can be closer to what you were describing, the vehicular metaphor.
Yeah.
But I still don't think it's completely. There's something more than just a vehicle. There's, I've experienced that where you feel like a vessel, a vehicle, and the thing is pouring through you. But there's also something, I don't know how to put it, between what you want to be there in the music and what's coming to you as well. There's a potential shaping of it or reshaping of it. So, but when it's at its best, there's a flowing through, that's very close to what Cecil Taylor was saying.
It's like the drummer for James Brown. They asked him where he got his sound. He was like the architect for funk drumming. And he
Right.
says,
Yeah.
I lived in Ohio and there was a factory on one side of my house and a train track on the other. So it's like, so, and it's endless. Ginger Baker, drummer for Cream, said, "Where'd you get your drum sound?" He says, "I was in London when they were bombing. Boom,
Oh,
boom, boom, boom,
wow.
boom."
Wow. That really
So,
explains his drumming a lot, because
yeah.
they're like
So,
these bombs go off. Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, it's partly both, but can art making, music making be egoless?
Relatively, yes. Not absolutely, I don't think, but relatively, yes. Um, where the ego is dimmed, doesn't get in the way. But the idea of complete egolessness, I think, can produce very negative effects. I'm not a fan of John Cage, for example, even though I do think John Cage made really good sociology with sound.
Yeah.
But I think there's a difference between sound and music. And so Cage's idea that you completely eliminate the ego, you completely eliminate intention, I think that was excessive. I think there are positive aspects to shaping something, which you can call that the ego. I mean, it's intentions that we bring to it. It's something, you're not just letting the thing flow raw, but there's a shaping. And so I would say relative egolessness,
Yeah.
that allows us to, to bring a sense of balance. Doesn't that involve some ego involvement to bring a balance, or this should end now? How do you do that when it's completely egoless?
Yeah. Talk about that's Cage said, okay, this piece, the silent piece, is going to end in 4 minutes and 33 seconds. He's that was very interesting what you brought up. I appreciate that.
Did you ever
McLuhan,
see Cage the orchestral orchestral performance of 4 minutes and 33 seconds?
I
It's
have not.
awesome. It's awesome. They're all sitting there still, and the conductor is every now and then turning the page.
No, I love it because I've studied the piece a lot and I didn't know that one, but I know it charted on the English pop charts about 15 years ago.
Wow. Wow.
Along with the Bulgarian Women's Choir, man, that tells you something about English pop charts.
It is.
So, McLuhan said that everything we invent extends some humanness or human sensorium. Like knife and fork extend our teeth, clothing extends our skin, and even non-tangible like religion or philosophy could be an extension of consciousness. What does the two things, the pen, which is, let's do one at a time, the pen or the keyboard, you're writing your utensil. You know, when you're writing a poem or writing a book, what does the pen extend? What humanness does it extend?
Well, Einstein said, "I and my pencil are smarter than I." So there's there's what the pencil can do, and then there's what Einstein did. And
Yeah.
I think the pen can be mightier than the sword. The pen can, or pencil can, extend the inner world. I mean, that's pretty cool that it can do that, And that idea that technical tools and so forth can extend the human is true. But I think there's also ways in our evolution that it could extend it could bring into us the non-human. So when we pay close attention to a range of wild animals and plants and the kinds of things that we could see as intelligent in them, they're imparting to us, different senses that it may not necessarily be even human. The way an animal hunts, that we mimic the way the bear hunts the seal, or we mimic the way the seal acts as prey to hunt the bear. We are taking on the non-human qualities. So I don't know, would that be instead of extension, intention? But yes, the implements, the pen, the whatever we can carve with, there are ways to externalize the mind, externalize the self. Actually, I've written on the meaning of things. I did a research study of things in people's homes, and one of the ideas I picked up pretty early on as I started to do this and thought about it, was that the things that we relate to, the things that are special for us, meaningful or valuable, whatever that specialness can consist in, can embody the self and literally be extensions of the self and literally be the self.
Yeah.
Our self is not a thing in a certain part of the brain, and it's not something limited to our body. To be a self is to be in interaction with our habitat and with the things of the habitat and with the significant things. And so, is the self of a writer or the mind of a writer really in their head, in the pencil, in the product that they make? A novel can be the embodiment, or Picasso painting. Where's Picasso? He's in the painting.
Yeah.
Which is more real, the painting or Picasso? A lot of artists will tell you that they can feel more real in their work than necessarily in themselves. Or actors who say they can be in the role. When you ask about their personal life, maybe it was Peter Sellers, someone I'm thinking of, like, no, I'm more in that role.
Yeah. Gene, it's a great McLuhan joke that he says about photography. The woman's pushing the baby buggy down the street, and the guy comes up and says, "What a beautiful baby you have." And the mother goes, "You should see her picture." So What does the we're going to get into what you touched on was biomimicry, but in a second, but just go to the harmonica. What humanness does the harmonica extend for you?
The voice,
Yeah.
especially. I remember I heard Isaac Stern one time say that he thought the violin was the closest to the voice, and that I could see that. But for
Yeah.
me, the harmonica is the closest to the voice.
Yeah.
It can project. When you think of how the harmonica got going, it was invented in the 1860s or so in Germany, but within a decade or two, the main sales of harmonicas were to the United States. And
Wow.
as they passed through the United States, especially like the marine band harmonica, uh, it got picked up pretty soon in the deep South, where guys sitting on their porch would learn to play not in the key of the harmonica, but in a different key where you could bend the notes more. And
Wow.
so cross harp was invented, and you know the original, the original harmonica was the marine band. Can you see that there? The
Yes. I
marine
love
band
that.
harmonica. Yeah,
I've got
and it's
several
only
of
it's only 10 holes, and when you blow in, it creates one sound. When you exhale, when you exhale one sound, inhale a different note for each of the
yeah.
10. And so, this is the kind of thing that was invented for like bands. So in the 1920s, for example, I once taught a harmonica class in the mid 90s at I think it was at a Barnes and Noble. And there was an old guy in the class who had played in the 1929 South Bend High School harmonica band. They had a whole band, with all the different size harmonicas and that.
Yeah.
And he had always played to written music. And I was doing a blues course with this, and he said, "You mean you can play without? How do you? What?" I said, "You make it up." He goes, "You make it up?" Yeah. So we did a little improvisation exercise, and I'll tell you, this was the greatest joy in this course. This guy did something where he improvised, and the lights went on. He had a revelation, and it just felt so gratifying to see someone who had played harmonica his whole life have this new experience.
It's beautiful. Yes, it happens. It's what happened with Frank Zappa's vibraphonist, Ruth Underwood, because she was raised classically trained. You play notes, and then it's like you have to shift your thinking a little to go into the improv. And so I wanted to go back for a second because what you touched on was something I learned from Carolyn Casey called biomimicry. And it's, yeah, we extend humanness with our inventions. McLuhan saying, we talked about this, that the most human thing is our technologies, are our inventions. We're extending our voice with our harmonica, but also we look to plants and nature and animals. And the guy who invented Velcro saw it in a plant and how this plant, and then he goes, well, I'm going to biomimicry. I'm going to biomimic. And, so there's many layers to that. But just in regards to poetry for a second, because you talked about the inner world or the interior landscape, T.S. Eliot said that poetry is outing the inner world.
Mm-hmm.
What language is your inner dialogue in?
My inner dialogue,
Yeah.
it varies. It can be in images. Um, it can be in music. It can be in words. I do meditations sometimes that involve asking questions, and the answers can come back in different ways. They can come back in a phrase. They can come back in an image. And it's
Yeah.
interesting when it comes back in an image, I think in one sense, an image does not lie, but it also doesn't tell you what it means necessarily. So how do you tease out what that image means? Um, it, our mind and our soul especially can put forth if we want to call them symbols, that can convey information in ways that provide an inkling of the truth, but also ask us to fill in our part, to fill it out of what it means. And I think that's a lot of, to me, that's what the inner world is composed of, these different ways of bringing to expression.
Beautiful. Eugene, Marcel Proust question. On what occasion do you lie?
On what occasion do I lie?
Yeah.
We're not talking about lying down, right?
you could put it into any context. I would say he's talking about lying, not
Okay.
down. Yeah.
Okay. Not like that Dylan song, "Lie, Lady, Lie," across my big brass bed. No.
Yeah, there you go. Quoting Bob Dylan. Very good.
On what occasion do I lie? I don't know. I've been in a situation where it's looking pretty grim if I don't. Yeah, I don't know. What occasion? I try not to lie,
Yeah. That's the question. That's the answer I get. And, the other end of the spectrum is Tom Waits. On what occasion do you lie? He says, I didn't know I needed an occasion.
Well, no, I actually, I have lied on occasion where it felt very clear to me that would have a good result for the person, for their purposes.
Yeah.
So
well,
that can get you into a variety of things, such as Santa Claus and whatnot.
One woman says that it's called manners.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting because what you were talking about also implies this seeking the truth. So Louis Buñuel said, I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it. And everybody I've said that to go, that's great. And then one person challenged me and says, oh, well, if I'm going to seek something, it's because I want to find it. So I morphed it in the question, if the cliche goes, if the journey is more important than the destination, the journey is more important than the destination. That's what we've heard. If that's true, then why do we have to seek or name a destination if the journey's more important?
The journey to where?
Yeah, that's it. The psychogeography, the flaneurs in 20s in Paris just sat at coffee houses and didn't seek anything, and then they eventually changed the world. So, yeah,
well, and their journeys. I think it's a really great exercise or practice to take a journey without a destination.
Yeah,
to go for a walk with no destination.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of the most enlightening things you taught me in our first interview was you go for a walk with your grandchildren and you what's the new tool you suggest? And you said the one you invent. Like if you pick up a stick and you go, oh, what can this be? Oh, it can be a flute, or it can be a toy. So let's get down to brass tacks finally, Eugene. What's the function of music?
The function of music. I'm going to go back to a tried and true answer. To be alive in the wonder of life.
Yeah, that's it.
Be alive in the wonder of life.
Yeah.
And if I can extrapolate that, to be alive in the wonder of life involves music.
Yeah.
There's music that we are in and immersed in. And our whole journey from whatever we were before being human into being human was completely in immersion in music. the birds are probably what helped to give us not only music, but language as well. I mean, the birds clearly have music. They invented it, not humans. And, I've looked at, when research is looking at for primates, for the closest analogs for human speech, find that they don't have the stuff going on with the sound, but that birds do. And that birds actually, the bird brain has some kind of analogs to the Broca and Wernicke speech production and recognition centers. And it looks like birds could be a model. So imagine you're an infant and you're out as a hunter-gatherer. Bird song is going on all the time. And so taking that in, again, like we're talking about the technology of the animals becoming us and we becoming us through them, the mimicry. The mimicry is a beautiful and a sacred thing. It's a religious wonder of bird song as something also practical. The birds are giving us a radar of everything happening for a few kilometers around. There's a wonderful book by a tracker and master naturalist, John Young, called What the Robin Knows. And he shows what he had learned from his teacher, Tom Brown Jr., who learned from an Apache scout and master, the way concentric circles of sound emanate out largely from bird call, but other insects and other animals, of a radar that can give you, distance and, proximate size of the creature and all that. So there's a very practical thing there, and mimicking the sound of birds, where if a certain predator likes a certain bird to eat, you imitate that bird, you can draw that predator and it could become your prey. Or you could attract the bird and it becomes your prey. So there's practical reasons there. And all of this is music, And I've come up with a term for the lost human. How archaeologists are always looking for the lost human, like the missing link. I'm sorry, the missing link.
Yeah.
Well, one missing link, at least, I was thinking about as what I call Homo percussionis. Like Homo sapiens?
Yeah.
Homo percussionis, the percussive human. So when fire goes back probably beyond the human. I think I saw something recently of a pre-hominid who had fire. So how do you make it? You make it with, knocking rocks together.
Yeah.
And so or flaking a tool to get a knife or an axe head, that if you're doing that, if you're, that's not going to work. You have to get into the groove, and the groove is a percussive rhythm. It's not only a rhythm, which is the beat, but the groove, which is the feel of the beat. So when you can become immersed in that, you're immersed in a rhythmic music. And
it's
again,
amazing.
I think these are all aspects of how we became what we are by an immersion in music. And I think they also speak to the functions, many functions of music.
And many functions, because Mickey Hart, the Dead's drummer, wrote a book that's good about where music came from. And it was like, they were hitting the logs to tell as a warning system. And you taking it to that point, I can't wait to tell one of these great percussionists we work with, that it is like fire, like this is a hot drum beat. And it's literally going to cause fire if you were hitting rocks together. But, what you said, Gene, was amazing, because Ben Sidran, a great jazz pianist, was talking to Sun Ra. And he said, so you worked with Fletcher Henderson. Did he affect and influence your sound? And Sun Ra says, no, the birds and the crickets influence my sound. And the same thing that Eric Dolphy said is like, where'd you get your sound? He goes, I went and listened to the crickets.
There you go. Yeah. There's various musics there.
Yeah. No, I love that.
They've shown that different species of birds in a forest are calling and responding in a musical pattern.
Oh yeah.
so that there's like it's like an orchestra, you know.
Yeah.
And they find that newborn humans are born. We are born uh, social, and we're born musical. The neuroscientists Colwyn Trevarthen and Stephen Malik were studying newborns, and they found within, I think, hours, if not a day or two, of birth, the newborn was able to engage in banter with the mother. That was Stephen Malik went to neuroscience. I think he was previously a musicologist. He started charting it out in musical notation, and he found that the call and response between them, it had the narrative, the pulse, the quality of music. And
Wow.
we can understand that the mother is aware of music and can do that. But how can a newborn infant do that when the prefrontal lobes are not there? This is
Yeah.
coming from a deeper part, an older part of the brain that's wired in. So we are wired, they call it communicative musicality.
Oh my God, that's heavy.
So, I mean, there's a function of music, and that communicative musicality, which is banter, imagine project that over a couple of years, the banter eventually starts to become significant, and eventually it becomes linguistic language.
Yeah.
So I believe that language emerges from a musical banter that goes deeper into our genome as well.
Yeah. Well, that's one of my questions. What's more fundamental, music or language?
Yes.
So,
Language of music. Yeah.
yeah, but it is funny that it develops eventually to getting Aaron Copland saying the four elements or ingredients of music are melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. So, what how do you explain tone color? First of all, before we go into the four, how do you explain tone color to the normal person, not in a musical terms? Like, how would you describe what is tone color?
Yeah. Uh, I don't know. Maybe tone color is how a sound feels.
Yeah.
Um, I remember I knew a flutist who in the 60s was taking lessons from the New York Philharmonic's flutist. I think his name was Murray Panitz. And in this class, another student was Eric Dolphy as well. But
Wow.
they're studying with this guy, Murray Panitz. And he said one time, this guy, Murray Panitz, said, it's not so much about how you get into the note, but then how do you get out of the note? So he's not talking about a piece or a movement or a phrase. He's talking about a note. So he didn't use the word tone color, but all of a sudden, if any given note can have that, where how you get in and how you get out, there's that shaping. That to me maybe suggests what could be meant by tone color.
It's beautiful. And Gene, when you're writing a song, I know it in get involves many aspects, but is there one of those four that you emphasize that's a jumping off point? Um, how do you navigate those when you're playing your harmonica? Melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. Just any sort of talk about the utilization of those four elements in your playing and composing, say.
Well, especially in playing, rhythm would be predominant. Uh, I think there's a problem with harmonica players I've heard who seem to be concentrated on melody. To me, if you allow your concentration to at least to the rhythm, if not deeper to the groove, the melody will follow. And concentrating on the melody, can make it too precise, or I don't know what. I mean, when I listen to Little Walter, I don't think he was thinking about melody at all, and yet he's spinning out these amazing melodies.
Yeah.
never repeats the phrase twice. If it's like a repeat, the second one will always be different. And I really feel that he's in that group. I had the good fortune to be able to do a number of gigs in the aughts, end of the 90s and the aughts, with a great singer from Chicago, the Tail Dragger, who learned to sing from Howlin' Wolf, and I think showed up late for some gigs and got the name from the Howlin' Wolf, said, "You the Tail Dragger," because showing up late. But I mean, he was a great teacher for me. He didn't play an instrument, but his phrasing and the space he left between things. And we would do tunes. And again, this was a lot of gigs I was doing with Rockin' Johnny and some of the other guys in my band at the time, John Baker and Rob Lorenz and others. We would do some of these Howlin' Wolf tunes that had no chord changes.
Yeah.
And I remember I had a conversation one time with a couple of jazz musicians, and they said, "Well, we've heard you play a couple of jazz tunes. Like, well, why do you play the blues?" And they were like implying that it's not as complex as jazz. And maybe it's not by their definition, but I had a trouble understanding, well, you think that makes music better? Because as Tail Dragger put it, he says, when I'm playing these tunes, I get into the hypnotic.
Yeah.
Into the hypnotic. And that to me goes to something that, maybe Aaron Copland needed an addendum, because there's not just rhythm.
Yeah.
But rhythm is the beat of the music. And to me, groove is the feel of the rhythm, and is something deeper, something more immersive.
Yeah. No, really well put. And since you brought that up, the space in between, Miles Davis said, he talked about the space in between the notes. In fact, you brought up the word funk and function. George Clinton, the godfather of funk, said funk is the absence of. So how do you navigate the space between notes? How do you know not to overplay? Any thoughts on that?
Breathing. I think breathing gives a good hint.
Yeah.
And a sense of appreciation for the silent space, for the drama it can produce, and for the for spareness. Spare expressiveness can be more powerful than overly wordy, so to speak, notes. So yeah, that sense of space can really be incredible. That's what, again, with Tail Dragger, he could leave open a space, and then come back and it's boom,
Yeah. I've studied the guitar for 50 years, and, I love all the shredders and the fast guys, but it's like, just give me the first 5 notes of Freddie King's "I'm Going Down."
Yeah.
Bop, bop, bop. That's it. Hey, it's like 3 notes. In fact, I saw Albert King play once, and every solo was the same, and it didn't matter. It was still unbelievable. Those guys knew how to not overplay.
Yeah, that's the thing, that the eloquence of spareness,
It's really well put. Eloquence of spareness. That is so well put. So you talked about notes. Thelonious Monk said there are no wrong notes. Any comment?
I agree. For Thelonious Monk, there are no wrong notes.
I've had that answer.
for mortals like myself, there are, whether you call them clinkers or what, I know a story of my ex-wife's father was a pretty well-known composer, George Rockberg, and he was visiting at the University of Buffalo, and there was I'm blanking the guy's name, another pretty well-known composer up there, and they went out to hear Thelonious Monk, who was in town playing.
Yeah.
And he described Thelonious Monk at the keyboard, and he hit the notes, and then he stood up, and in time with the music, took his sweet time,
Yeah.
came back and hit it.
That's it.
And that's also an extrapolation on spareness, and not, but the drama of seeing him, but he was a magician in that he could get away with that stuff, and it was super effective,
Super. My friend says it so well, Duggo. He says, Monk heard all the same notes Charlie Parker heard, but only decided to play some of them. Isn't that amazing? And that's called epistrophe, what you talked about. That's what epistrophe is spinning around. So then another friend of mine says the 3 T's of music are technique, theory, and taste. Technique, you've learned how to blow those notes in and out of the harmonica. Theory, you know what chords you're playing, blah, blah. How does one acquire taste?
To me, especially early on, is listening to a lot of harmonica players, or and more generally in music, just listening a lot, and through that experience, developing selectivity, or if you have friends who can, mentors who can cue you into that. But it is, and again, there's a subjectivity to taste. You can have 2 people with 2 different kinds of tastes and play the same thing, and it may work for both, in 2 different ways. But that is, I think, important taste of, it's like I had the fortune of when I was teaching a general liberal arts course at Notre Dame, to have more than a few times, maybe at least 5 or 8 times, actors from London who were touring come into the classroom. And anytime I had an opportunity to have that, I would go for it. Although I was in sociology, not in English. And I would tell the class, hey, I'm not an English professor. You got to do the work, and with these guys coming in. But I remember one time they took a scene from As You Like It, and I think the Duke and his men have been exiled, so they're out in the woods, and the guy did it 2 different ways. The Duke gives his speech, and then one of them, it's this kind of heroic speech like this, and the men are going like that, and yes, yes, yes. And then he did the same thing again, and he had the men going like this. They're all freezing, and that they're freezing to death in the forest changes the meaning of the same words. More irony, they're not heroic anymore. So the range of a completely written text of how it can be done, again, that has a lot to do with taste. You can do it a certain way, but is that going to meet the taste test?
Yeah. Gene, McLuhan says an interesting thing, and it's not that I agree or disagree, but I welcome your thoughts. Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference.
Song is slowed down speech.
Yeah, and then I'll read it again. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference.
Yeah, that second part, I don't know. I don't know if different musical cultures are because of different language cultures. I don't see why you couldn't have different language cultures because of different musical cultures. And there's a lot of other stuff that goes into the cultures,
Well, I like the tuba throat singers, and
Mhm.
I mentioned that I find their music transcendental, but then I found out they sing about three things: their horses, their boots, and the snow. but
It
but
works
you
for them. Yeah.
tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh.
Instrumental that makes you laugh. I don't know the name of it, but there was a duo, uh, Mingus and Eric Dolphy. Charles Mingus and Eric Dolphy did a duo,
Yeah.
and it is the nastiest, expletive-laden, dirty word duo you'll ever hear instrumentally.
Oh
There are
my
no
God.
there are no words in it, but they are cussing each other out, you know, and it's hilarious.
Oh man, if you get a title or a link, let me know
I'll
because
do, I'll do
I
that.
know that Eric quit Mingus's band, and then Mingus punched him out and said, "You're fired." So, Ben Radliff, this
Better
is
late
funny.
than never, I guess, for Mingus.
Yeah. Ben Ratliff is a music writer. He says, I mean sound as it is long functioned among jazz players as a mystical term of art, as in every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note. So, or in a few notes, we could hear a couple notes and go, oh, that's Monk. Or we could hear a couple notes and go, that's Miles. Or a good example, Little Walter. Oh, that's Little Walter. So Ben used two words, or like two or three words. He said, Miles is fragile and pointed. Coltrane is slightly undercooked and urgent. If a music writer that you highly respected was going to describe the Jumpin' Gene sound in a couple words, what two words would you feel he got it? You know,
Huh. How about deft? The word I
DEFT.
yeah.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's etymologically, I think it's related to daft as well. So I'll keep that. They're deft, uh, impassioned.
MIM
I
passion.
am passionate. Yeah,
Yeah,
that would
very
be
cool.
an honor for me to be told that.
Yeah. How cool is that? That was super cool. So, what's more important, conviction or compromise?
Well, I would say if I was facing 10 to 20 years of conviction for 10, sentenced to 10 or 20 years, I'd go for compromise. Conviction or compromise. Uh, I conviction is really important, but in some situations, compromise is necessary.
Yeah.
And these are kind of polar extremes, and a lot of life questions come more in the middle problematically. You know, I mean, what was in Yeats's poem 1918? It's about people that are just totally anchored down in conviction, but they're wrong. Um, and you don't want to compromise your convictions, but yet sometimes to have there's no way you can know that your conviction is always right, and sometimes your conviction may be right, but the compromise may be necessary to get part of something rather than nothing. I don't know if that's an answer, but
That's good. Um, you've accomplished a lot. These three elements, just overall, put them in the order of how they helped you with your accomplishments: luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
well, let's see. I'd go luck ambition, and skill.
Wow.
And it doesn't mean I value skill as third, but I feel like luck and ambition were more upfront, or like, earlier in time in things that I've done, and the skill kind of develops as I've gone along.
That's
And
the more
the
you
reason for
the more you practice, the luckier you get. But
Yeah.
it's funny. Your observations of humans in general, is ambition based more on fear or more on joy?
In the world today, unfortunately, I'd say fear has risen. If I can imagine right now, I'm imagining a graph, where the lines go up, but they cross, and I think joy has probably gone down and fear has probably gone up. We have fear industries today, commercial fear industries, that are out there to imbue people with fear as a way of manipulating them toward commercial ends.
Yeah.
And, the levels of fear that you see in the United States now is it's awful. But it's not there by accident.
Yeah.
It's there's fear inducers.
Gene, anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
Anger can be a productive emotion when acknowledged and voiced rather than unacknowledged and acted out.
Wow. Utah Phillips, great folk singing labor activist, said anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Who's entitled to make the rules? Well, for oneself, one has room for rulemaking, but one doesn't make up all the rules. One is given certain parameters as well. Who's entitled? Well, we have, in a democracy, we entitle people to take on that role as rule makers. And when they don't do the rules in a way that we believe is fair, supposedly we can change them out and put other people and other rules in place. Often it doesn't work that way. Yeah, it's a tough question. It's again, I don't want to keep going to like it depends on the situation, but it really does.
Yeah, no, it's fine. A lot of my questions are that way. It's fine. What's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
Rights and responsibilities. Off the top of my head, I guess rights are what we have, and responsibilities are what we need to enact, what we need to practice. You can also practice your rights, but they're sort of given. But responsibilities are something that you have to be proactive to take out, and also the acknowledgement that both of these are there, not just entitlement, and not just responsibility without rights. That we shouldn't have to be responsible to be able to vote when we've done all the things, and then the rules are changed to make it impossible to vote, for example. So I think the two of these, in a democracy especially, rights and responsibilities need to be wed to each other and practiced.
Yes. Gene, you've in your massive creativeness in all your endeavors, your imagination, tell me one major element that's stayed the same and one major element that's changed.
One element that maybe has stayed the same is idea of doing something myself, of an enthusiasm for learning something myself, for
Yeah.
not knowing the rules and trying it out. When I first picked up harmonica, I just played randomly, and then I would find two notes that worked together, and then I'd try to build on that, And of course, it was really slow. And when I had this friend Mark Edelson in Chicago show me, I learned much quicker, So technically, I could have learned much quicker. When I was high jumping, I made up my own ways of training, that were not the official way, but that worked in a lot of ways. But then sometimes I would learn things that could have sped the process up, but I'm still glad I did it that other way. That stayed the same with me. I still
that's beautiful, Gene. Let me just ask you a quickie. Do you think you got that sort of I'm going to try this myself? It's courageous, or it's brave, and it's something about yourself. Do you think you got that more from the way your parents raised you, or more on your own?
There could have been an influence of my parents giving me a lot of free space. I mean, back in the day, when I was 5 and 6, the kids and where I lived, we'd go off into the woods by ourselves and hang out, and you don't get that as much anymore. That freedom, everything there tends to be more supervised play and organized play. So there could have been an influence both from my parents and from the culture at the time. But there was also something from me too. I remember one time, the neighbors across the street, I had a driveway going downhill, and I remember taking my bicycle and starting it and letting it go by itself, and it went down the hill by itself right out into the street. And it was like, wow, that's awesome. It can ride by itself. Until my dad came over and yelled at me for launching bicycles into the middle of the street where there could be cars coming by. That's the same thing. It was like, wow, it can go by itself. It works, like that's something that has stayed with me.
It's amazing, these things that we retain. It's a beautiful image. The way you are with words, you're a wordsmith that really painted a picture that I felt I could visualize and understand with your words. So thank you.
Thank you.
So one thing that changed, would you say, in your creativeness, in your imagination over these decades you've been doing this? That was a good example of the same. That stayed the same, that element of doing it yourself. What's one major element that's changed?
Well, greater appreciation for the role of practice, of practicing and practicing and practicing. I had the great fortune, again, I feel so fortunate in my life to be able to have played music the last 8 years with a group that started out as a high school band in the 60s in South Chicago, called the Newports. And these guys had a great high school band for, 4 years, maybe 5 years, with some people graduating. But now we got that band got back together, and I knew the bass player in the band invited me to join them for an open mic, and it went well, and we ended up playing for 8 years together. And these guys are amazing, outstanding musicians. There's 6 of the 9 were originals.
Wow.
And me, the lead singer, and the drummer were the new guys, and the practice standards and the high standards of musicianship. Plus, this is a horn band, and there's often like oil and water for harmonica and horns. And I needed to learn how to not get in the way of the horns, how to, voice when needed, but not be, too much in the way. Plus, they were playing rock and, some R&B and jazz tunes. They were playing a lot of music I grew up with, but never thought I could play on harmonica. Like, the Doors, Touch Me. I never thought I'd play on that. So that when we would have practices, the band ended we did our last concert in June, but I just had a great appreciation of, the more you practice, the luckier you get as well. That this, this really hones things, and I took that away not just from music, but that to me is a great life lesson too.
Life lesson, beautiful. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Well, early on, I couldn't jump, and I ended up becoming Jumping Gene. In college, I couldn't write, but as I applied myself, especially in graduate school, I learned how to write well.
Yeah.
In music, I couldn't play harmonica, and gradually, especially with the help of other people and mentors and listening to some of the great harmonica players, not only of the originals of Chicago, but some of the others, Kim Wilson, Rod Piazza, Mark Hummel, other great next generation harmonica players. That really brought me along.
Dude, I asked for one, you gave me three. You are really articulate and brave. That you really flipped those. We call that, how do you turn a breakdown into a breakthrough, or a rejection into a redirection? Really well done. So what's the most significant difference between men and women, physical aside?
Wow. The most significant difference between men and women, physical aside. Well, I've noticed some of the differences that have been pointed out in studies of men tending to be more differential and women more affiliative. I used to notice that in classrooms where the male students would show you how an idea is different from another one, and with the same theme or object, a female in the class would show how it relates to another idea, where the male in the class would show how it's different. So, and that's, that could be socialization differences, but I suspect it's also more temperamental as well.
Yeah. Gene, there's a line that goes, you create what you resist. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into, you are what you hate. In fact, James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So basically, I'm asking you, what do you think of this idea? Not you, Gene, you create what you resist, that one creates what one resists. You create what you resist. What do you think of this idea in your observations of humans?
You create what you resist. It's hard for me to think of an example of you create what you resist. I mean, I could see where if there's something not there, you can create something to put something there. But that doesn't seem like the same as resist. I mean, there's things that maybe I haven't wanted to do, but I make myself do them.
Yeah.
I don't know if that qualifies as create, though.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I have a good answer for that.
That's all right. These are 5 Alan Watts questions, just off the top of your head, in a couple words, briefly.
Yeah, I have a light that's sort of wandering here. Hang on.
No worries.
Okay. Yeah.
Perfect. So just in a couple words off the top of your head.
Yeah.
First, Alan Watts, who started it all?
Well, we did, didn't we?
Are we going to make it?
It's a good question.
Where do we put it?
Where does it put us?
Who's cleaning it up?
Well, it may clean us up.
Is it serious?
Oh, yeah.
I loved it. You did great there. Okay, couple more. We're out of here. Thank you so much, Gene. This has again been so fun. How do you find peace of mind?
Well, I guess I just lose my mind.
Whoa, that's a good answer.
You know, it's wonderful to be able to lose your mind, and there's many different ways to do it.
Yeah.
Short of the asylum, you know, to get out of your head, you know, to go for a walk in the woods and, you know, not be thinking the thoughts in here, but letting the landscape speak to you, or just getting into your senses, getting into the visceral awareness rather than the mind.
Yeah.
And being in your visceral awareness in many ways is a peaceful mind.
Yeah.
You know, I think we're mind dominated in the modern world to our
Yeah.
detriment. And anything we can do to keep our minds in their places, whatever, keep your mind in your place. So losing your mind, I think, is a great way to have a peaceful mind.
Yeah. You know, back to the function of music, great pianist, Storm and Norman Zamchek said, what's the function of music? He says, to keep us from going insane. And McLuhan says, you can't prove you're sane unless you have discharge papers from a mental hospital.
It's like there was a guy in the 19th century who said, they said I was insane. I said, they're insane. They outvoted me.
Or the Peter Lorre voice in one of Spike Jones' songs says, you're driving me sane.
You're driving me sane.
That's good. You got that down. That was good. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Well, actually, you know, I could go to my garage where I told you I had those cells of different decades.
That's it.
Hanging there. I could just go there and go to the, you know, what would I say to my 12-year-old self? My 12-year-old self, probably going into 7th grade or in 7th grade. It's okay.
Nice.
Keep doing what you're doing, and you won't believe what's out there for you.
Woo! Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
I know there's some underhanded people out there, but I'm going to go for over the top.
That's what 90% of people say. The patent has it going over, but the people who say under have their reasons.
Well, they're the underhanded people, you know?
That's it. If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Oh, that's a great question. What would it be? I don't know. I would not hold myself to this. This would be my like rough draft title, Jumpin' Gene. But I don't know if that's a good title. I don't have a good title. I don't know.
I was thinking, Gene, just Jumpin' by
Jumpin'.
Gene.
Well, thank you.
And Jumpin'. That's, you got it, because it's so many ways you jump. I love that.
Thank you.
They want to scent the glue in the binding of your autobiography. What smell?
Saltwater taffy.
Ooh, tastes good too. If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
I wouldn't want one made, first of all. I mean, I actually had this experience of being in, I think it was in Boulder, Colorado, and I'm walking along. I was at a conference, and all of a sudden I come on this big statue, and I look, what's the name? It's like it was Frank Shorter, the runner,
Uh-huh.
and I used to be in track meets with him. And do you know how
Uh-huh.
weird it is to encounter someone that you used to be in track meets as a statue there? And then I remember the former president of Notre Dame, Father Hesper. There's one of him on campus, and it's just not right. It's just, you know, creepy kind of. With, you know, it's too bad. So if this is a force, I would like to have. Let's say I'll go with my saltwater theme here. A statue of me on the ocean shore. I grew up in an ocean town. I cleaned the beach up for a few years. I was a lifeguard there for a few years. I would like it right at the shoreline at low tide, made out of sand.
Nice. That's beautiful. Gene, tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Something good I never had and never want. I'll go for immortality.
Oh my God, I've had that
Have you?
answer. It's good. We think it's good. You never had it and you never want it. So yeah, that's amazing. It's a complex question.
It is.
I wrote an essay recently collecting all my favorite quotes about death. And it's intriguing. I'd love for you to get your feedback on some of these.
Please send it. Yeah. You know, I'm right now in the middle of rereading. I read it years ago. I'm rereading Don DeLillo's novel White Noise.
Oh my God.
Actually, today the movie of that is coming out.
Oh yeah.
So I started a few days ago, and I don't know if I'll finish it. I don't know if I'll watch the movie tonight, but I feel like I don't want to watch the movie till I finish rereading the novel. But it's an amazing ruminations on death, on consumption, on technology, and it was written in 1986, but it feels in some ways completely contemporary, or even more contemporary in some ways today.
You know, Hitchcock and McLuhan's favorite joke about movies was two goats were eating film coming out of a film can, and one turned to the other and said, "The book was better."
That's great.
If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Now, if I heard you correctly, I'm in a vat of vomit. Okay, are there waves, or is it?
Well, now you're getting deeper. No one ever asks the actual word, the parameters. So you put it into the context you want.
Okay, and they're throwing shit at me. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
They're throwing a bag of shit at your face.
I'm gonna backstroke real fast.
Yeah. You got to hear that's probably rates in the top 3 answers ever, because this woman on the Venice boardwalk, really cute. I asked her the question, you got to be careful asking this question. And she said, I would take the velocity of the bag of shit and I would use it to swoop my way out of the vat of vomit. And I said, that's the Descend to the Maelstrom short story by Edgar Allan Poe. He sees the boat parts and he's going to go to his death broken by the storm. And he says, well, I'll just use this pattern of the whirlpool to swoop my way out.
Well, I'm wondering myself why it felt easier to answer that question then to answer your question about the difference between men and women, I don't know.
That's because maybe it involves the breaststroke, the backstroke, all kinds of strokes. Who knows?
Breaststroke, that's the difference.
What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
The cultural shift that inspires me. For me, this may be a little abstract, but the turn in science, in the sciences, to reappreciate the voice of the earth, or the voices of the earth.
Yeah.
In the science.
Yeah.
I mentioned in the last interview we did, Lewis Mumford has been a big influence on me, and his critique of the history of science, especially modern science, as the development of the modern mega machine. I think modern science has achieved great precision, but it arose under this model of the machine. The universe is a great ticking clock. And what I'm finding is the more influences of the organic world getting in and altering that clock universe. So, like the research of Susan Simard on forests and mycorrhizal, fungi, like a neural net without a brain. I think a journalist called her work the wood wide web. We're starting to realize that trees are sentient creatures, that hub trees or mother trees can selectively feed offspring. Turns like this to greater appreciate how smart the rest of nature is, not just a clockwork, a computer or something like that. I find that inspiring, that science is, and it's doing it, from within science, but it's opening up to, kinds of sources that it hadn't before. About 5 years ago, I helped co-organize a conference on a theme of a term that I came up with was sustainable wisdom. And the conference came out as a book called Indigenous Sustainable Wisdom. And there are a lot of indigenous practitioners of the arts and of indigenous arts and sciences. Like John Young was there, the guy who did the research on, the book on What the Robin Knows. And, a lot of the Native American people who brought an expertise, the ones who had an expertise to bring, were showing, they're also activists and other kinds of scholars, but showing these are things that science needs to consider. There was one biologist, Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is a Pokagon, in the Pokagon band of the Potawatomi Nation. And she became a biologist and then began to get back to her roots. And she found that the traditional learning she had of the honorable harvest, how to harvest, not to have a monocrop culture kind of thing, has fed her research in biology. And that to me is inspiring, to go back to your original question, the ways that science is now opening to these original sources and also organic wild nature.
Gene, can you go a few more minutes? Because I got a couple bonus questions because you're so dang smart.
Bonus questions. So round two, is this a...
Well,
sure, I'm good with it, yeah.
The reason I ask is science calls me to the bathroom. So I was wondering if you wanted to play a little harmonica for maybe a minute or two while I take a bathroom break really quick.
Sure.
Okay,
great.
Here we go. Go ahead. Tear it up.
Okay, hang on a second here. What I got here? I got something here. Don't know what to play, but let's try something. the voice. I want my mama.
I want my mom. That is that Sonny Terry roots there,
Oh yeah, no,
mom.
and well, that's the deep south on the porch, you know, where you can do that. You can. What's that sound? So forth. Yeah.
That was beautiful, Gene. That was the baby train.
Oh,
I
the baby
want my
train.
mama and the train of freedom. Well, thank you so much because science did call. A couple questions you brought up because I'm so grateful for you teaching me more about Lewis Mumford. That was good last time and this time. In bringing up nature, are the laws of nature cruel?
Are the laws of nature cruel?
Yeah.
I don't see them as cruel at all.
Yeah.
They are, on one level, they are what they are. But the laws of nature seem to me to bring forth wonder,
Yeah.
to bring forth life, to bring forth a term that Peirce used, Charles Peirce, the philosopher, I mentioned in the last session we did.
Yes.
He had an interesting term called variescence, where you can produce an increase in the independent aspects of an organized system. So nature is not just mutation, but it's increasing variescence. It's creative in a sense. These laws are creative as well. Now, if we don't live by them, they can appear cruel. Famine can appear cruel, for example.
That's like fire management. American
Mhm.
Indians, indigenous know about that. That's,
Mhm.
yeah. So, what's the difference between science and art?
Science and art. I was trying to deal with this a few months ago in something I was writing where, science, art bodies forth. Science tends to abstract. Art tends to the making, the creating, the filling out. Science tends more toward negating. There's some interesting discussions in D.H. Lawrence, who's been a major influence on me as well, of a critique of the dominance of mind in modern life, of being over cognitive, over minded, and he talks about it as this abstract way of the world versus what he calls the primal way of consciousness, which he calls affirmative mind. So he sees these as in opposition in a sense, and that we need to recall affirmative mind to the world and create a new balance with them. William Blake talked about the rational mind as the negligiousness, a murderer, and in contrast to the poetic imagination. And for Blake, Newton signified the science of abstract rational reasoning that by itself is a secondary function, not primary, but had taken itself to become primary. Blake felt that the right relationship was the poetic imagination as primary, the negating, rational side of things as a secondary consciousness. I like to think of it as when we develop as kids, the yes comes first and the no comes later, the ability to say no. And that's the right way that it should be. So, Blake also had this interesting discussion of the contraries. So the relationship of the poetic imagination to this negating consciousness, or what Lawrence calls the affirmative mind, to mind or the rational, as contraries rather than dualistic opposition. So by calling it the contraries, the affirmative mind or the poetic imagination can allow the negation, but the proper balance should be more weighted toward the creative poetic imagination or affirmative mind. In other words, another way I've looked at it is the negating mind, the rational, the stuff that goes on, especially in our forebrain, is part of a newer part of the brain. It's not as developed as the older parts of the brain. And the affirmative mind probably has much more to do with those older parts of the brain. And so we are relatively unmatured primates. We have neoteny or newborn-like qualities much longer than other primates. And so as these more newborn-like primates with these less fully timed to mature in the course of evolution forebrains of rationality, I think the modern world put that to maximize. The proper place is to optimize it, to go back to the beginning of our discussion, by allowing its harnessing or connection to the passions, to the poetic imagination in Blake's terminology, but to the emotional and passionate mind. When bounded by that, it works optimally. When unbounded, as our modern world has done and set all this stuff loose, it leads to catastrophe because it's not mature on its own enough. It requires that tuning in, that harnessing. Just as when we evolved, we tuned into the environment and it gave us the right rules for living.
Tuning in was beautiful. Gene, so enlightening. And it's like, this was so cool how our first one went. I'm just about to end, and all of a sudden we go into all these epiphanies that I've learned. Oh my God. I was like, okay, we're just got a few more minutes. And now same thing happened because Gurdjieff said that laughter is the reconciliation of yes and no. So I love that. Children, yes first and then no. Really beautiful. But Bob Dylan just put out a book and he says, in a real sense, the only thing that truly unites us is suffering, and suffering alone. We all know loss, whether we're rich or poor. It's like, yeah, right. You're a rich rock star. You know loss. And I know what he's saying. My friend who knows Dylan told me when I read that to him 2 days ago, he says, no, he's known loss. So yeah, I mean, he's had a really rich and vibrant life and has affected all of us. I mean, you quoted Dylan earlier, but I'm curious when you say the affirmative mind from D.H. Lawrence. I come from parents who raised me, accent the positive. Attitude is all, have a positive attitude and not to be too mamby-pamby or Pollyanna, which I'm often accused of. You're too positive. But I'm curious how you would process that affirmative mind, because affirmative means being positive, as far as I know, what D.H. Lawrence is leaning towards, to Dylan saying the only thing that truly unites us is suffering.
Well, I don't think Dylan's right. I think it's not the only thing. It is something. Yeah. It's a significant, a major thing. But all babies laugh. That unites us. All of us were babies, and all of us have laughed.
Yeah.
So you could say laughter, to go back to the Gurdjieff, I think it was quote.
Yeah.
Laughter unites that yes and no. And there's the affirmative mind. Laughter is a kind of expression is one expression of the affirmative mind. I mean, when you're in music, would you want to take the time to say, I don't think that it's possible to do this song in this tempo? When you're playing it, is that going to help the music? You want to be in it. That's the affirmative mind, where it would be wrong to do the doubting mind. So there's aspects of everyday living where that affirmative mind is what we do. And it can be habit, but it can also be more than habit as well. But again, it's keeping the doubting, negating consciousness, which is incredibly valuable to us, but in its place. The
Yeah, and it's
abstracting quality.
abstract. Yeah,
Abstract is an abstracting from something. So what is it that's being abstracted from? That's
yeah,
where we can also be, find our being in that affirmation of that.
yeah, because that susses out my questions about these words: affirmative versus doubting mind, negating. But then when you throw in abstracting, because I find that critical thinking implies doubting something, but are you saying not necessarily so? Like,
Yes, it does. Critical thinking involves doubting something.
yeah,
And, Lawrence had an interesting way of putting this. The basis of consciousness, he believed, is touch, haptic or touch. And I mean, to me, I just find Lawrence a brilliant thinker. He's a novelist. He's mainly known as a novelist, but he talks about the basis of thinking is touch, the basis of being, the basis of consciousness, not just self-consciousness, but the consciousness of living things is touch. And he says, so with humans, thought is a way of getting out of touch. It's abstracting, getting out of touch in order to get back in touch. So the role of the doubting and the abstracting is to get a distance in order to go back into the touch. And I think that's of a piece with Blake's idea of the primacy of the poetic imagination as well. So the affirmative mind, the doubting mind is to distance, abstract, in order to go back to that direct touch of being.
it reminds me also of fasting, which if you look up fasting, they call it a pseudoscience. And I'm like, how could that be pseudoscience? Because if you do without something, like if we all decided worldwide to not use a cell phone for one day, and then everybody has a meeting and says, well, what happened? And we discuss what happened by fasting, we probably could move the project forward a little. So that I like you getting distant from it. Is that's similar to fasting, right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, there's an aspect of fasting, say, getting distant from food, but
Yeah.
I think there's I don't know, I haven't read research on fasting, but I know that when you do longer fasts, you can create changes in physiology that can be very health promoting for a lot of different disorders.
Yeah.
And so I think there's that whole aspect to it as well. It's not just a mental thing of getting distant from food and coming back in it. There's all kinds of physiological things that go on as well.
Yeah, I got two more, but as you know, with me and you, it might develop into a couple more. But it's yeah, in fact, laughter, Joyce in Finnegan's Wake added the words A and S and turned it into laugh tears. So it's like he changed the word to encompass the human condition. You laugh and you cry, you fall down, you get back up. And Burgess, Anthony Burgess was a music guy, composed, wrote 8 books on Joyce. And Anthony Burgess said, we must now ask some very different questions about the relationship between music and life. Is there any unresolved questions you have about music and life?
Well, before I answer that, I just want to mention to you that after our last interview, a friend of mine in Chicago who watched it, who has read Joyce out loud for years and years, claimed that you caused him, and I'll let you take the blame, to spend 2 hours after that interview reading Joyce out loud.
Ah, what's his name?
His name is Kevin Fagan.
Good. But I mean, it's serious. It's funny, and you don't have to say in music, but we must now ask some very different questions about relationship between music and
Music
life.
and life,
Or
yeah.
yeah, or just your Eugene-ness and life. I have to tell you, I use a D.H. Lawrence quote in the press kit for one of my movies, and it's basically about him. I think he's analyzing a Cezanne painting, and he says the painting has appleness. It's a
Oh yeah,
painting. Yeah. So, he added that word ness,
right.
appleness.
And, and you can't see all around it. There's
Yeah.
something about it that's, it's not, and I don't just mean flat 2 or 3 dimensional, but you won't see an apple in the world that looks like a Cezanne apple, but it gets at the essence of appleness nonetheless. Yeah.
The
It's, it,
S.
it is life brought out in the Cezanne apple. It's completely life there, even though it's not literally like
Yeah.
an apple in life.
But it's maybe the question I'm getting at is I've said to students before, get your life and your job as mixed up as possible. And
Mm-hmm.
it seems as though that's what you've done. You've gotten your jumping, your music, your book writing, and your educating career as mixed up as possible with your life. What question remains unresolved?
Well, if I play music, it is life, and it is
Yeah.
the flow of life going on. So there's that ongoing life. Um, what questions about music and life do I have?
Well, yeah.
Relationship of them?
Yeah, the relationship between music and life, is there any unresolved questions?
Yes, the music and life not yet played.
It's around the corner. Street corner talking. So, this question you've answered, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Second to last question, Gene. Yeah, right. Thornton Wilder says, this is 1928. Art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the
Mhm.
same time. So you've laid your cards on the table for over like 3 or 4 hours now with me. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. The question is, what's it really all about for you? Now, it's easy for us to just, I mean, not easy. It's a theme to go back. What's it really all about for Jumpin' Gene? To be alive in the wonder of life. Right. But what's beyond that? What's like, is there a deeperness to that? What's deeper than to be alive in the wonder of life for you?
So could you restate the question, please?
it's it's a pretty it's a pretty weird, stupid question, but it's basically what I'm implying with the Thornton Wilder is he says art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. I should say, is there something deeper in your motive to be alive in the wonder of life? Where did that come from? What's the story of that origin in your pursuit of that?
Well, I hope to be able to live my vision fully
Yeah.
and fearlessly.
Yeah.
And that involves all the different kinds of levels, to to love my family and friends, and um, to practice um, gifts that I've been given, to um, to keep concerns about the world. I see a world a kind of cascading collapse that touches all levels. It's not just climate, it's mental as well. And I see a house of cards that we built that just, a little flick here and there, a little invasion of Ukraine, a little, murderous, small catastrophes that can tip the whole thing. Yeah. And I really have a sense that we're heading toward that in the next decade. And so, are there things to be done, or is the cake baked already? These are dark concerns. And let's say we have a decade left. What do you do then?
Yeah.
And the best I've been able to come up with is to try to live my vision as fully and fearlessly as I can.
Yeah. Love that word, fearlessly. You're really a wordsmith. I appreciate how articulate you've been.
Thank you.
What gives you the most optimism?
The most optimism. The incredible capacity of the earth to renew itself continuously. And not the earth in the abstract, but this involves people as well to have the capacity of renewal, to have the newborns the capacity to develop and grow, and adults to have the capacity, even if it's squashed, to renew. Sometimes people are already dead. There's the living dead, and the living dead who will never be able to renew their lives. But this ability of the earth to renew, I feel that gives me an optimism. Should we cascade into collapse, I believe the earth will renew in whatever ways.
Yeah.
It can.
I love that word, renew. It's so good. And the first question I asked in our first interview was, what is the best thing for a human being? And Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being. And the last question is, what gives you the most optimism? That's the question they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he said, other people. So this, your fearlessness in love and practice, to believe in renewal is, you brought up the word people, even young and old. Because, the answer I get the most for what gives you the most optimism is young people or youth. Mm-hmm. So you encompass that. You said youth, but you also said all people. It doesn't mean they have to be young. And
yeah, most of the time I don't agree with Sartre, who said hell is other people.
Yeah.
And then, then someone else said hell is other people like Sartre. Most of the time I don't. Sometimes you do have to agree with him. But yeah, other people,
yeah,
can be a source of optimism.
Yeah. And then McLuhan said that communication. No, first I'll tell you the joke, because you're a good guy about laughing. I appreciate it. The priest is crossing the Canadian border, and he has a flask. And the custom officer says, "Excuse me, Father, what's in that flask?" And he says, "It's water." And the custom officer says, "Give me that." And he takes it and swigs it, and he goes, "That's whiskey." And the priest goes, "It's a miracle." So I'll tell you another music joke. Barbara Morrison, the great blues and jazz singer in LA. I think you appreciate this one too. Is she goes, "I'm a musician, and I was driving to the gig the other day, and I saw a hitchhiker, and he had a guitar case. I says, well, fellow musician, I've got to pick him up." So I picked him up, and we're driving along, and I says, "So are you a musician?" He goes, "No, I'm a magician." And he put his hand on my leg, and I turned into a hotel. So McLuhan has this great line. communication of the new is a miracle, but not impossible. So I really am grateful, Jumpin' Gene, of all the newness you've brought. Like you use the word renew. I just got a lot of new insights and epiphanies from our time together. And like I said, let's just sign up and do a 6-hour TV special and just keep this
Anytime.
going, keep it going on and on forever.
Well, thank you so much, Jerry. You know, and thank you for, I think I'm listed here as number 184 or something like that.
Yeah.
You're doing these things a couple a week, and that persistence is wonderful. I
Well,
really am grateful that you are doing this and taking your time to do serious interviews with people, picking their brains and talking about the kinds of stuff. It's not easy to answer these questions a lot, but I
yeah.
really appreciate that you're out there and doing this, and I thank you
Yeah.
for that.
I really appreciate you. That was so much. And we'll be in touch. Jumpin' Gene, thank you so much. And thanks for blowing the harmonica, man. That was killer to have a musical break. Woo!
Bye bye.
Later. Thank you,
Okay.
Gene.